The HR Stories podcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories helps businesses and nonprofits better manage the employee experience, providing the tools, training, and resources they need to take their organization to the next level. Each week on the HR Stories podcast, management and HR consultants John Thalheimer and Chuck Simikian dive into the stories that matter to small business owners, nonprofit leaders, and HR professionals. We continue to be amazed at how companies allow poor decision-making, lack of knowledge, or in some cases, hubris to cause harm to their organizations. Each week, we discuss stories where companies must pay large fines, lose great talents, and even stain their reputation within the community. And then we tell you how to avoid the same fate. Welcome to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story. How's it going, Chuck? Wow, it's sort of been like 5 minutes since we've talked on the air. How's it going?
Yeah. Folks, what John's referring to is we just completed a class on fa-la-la-la-laws, which is just a little quick term I found, company holiday parties in the workplace, your legal considerations. It's a great class we did. We had a bunch of participants, and it's available for you on team@hrstories.com. You can check it out, download it, and you would get a free holiday checklist, holiday parties checklist. So we just finished that, and now we're jumping into the podcast. And John, things are going great. I want to remind everyone that we are the team at HR Stories, team@hrstories.com. We not only do this fantastic award-winning podcast, but we also do HR consulting, leadership consulting. You are a decorated leadership coach. And for that, I salute you. And those of you that are watching us, those of you that are watching us.
Yes, I've been done. No saluting. We save that for military people only. I think that one, I love, you did a great job on that webinar, and I love that we're doing that. And we are now in the process of planning out for 2024. We're going to do at least 2 workshops every month going forward, but we're also going to do some freebies and some other things. So definitely tune in for that and make sure that you're listening to the podcast. We'll be announcing those workshops, but you can always go to the team at HR Stories /workshops and you'll see them there because we have a lot of on-demand stuff as well. So
yeah. Good. John, do you want to talk about the HR kitchen table for our listeners? Because that's been something we launched. It's a free, and it's wonderful for us to share wisdom with each other as HR professionals and practitioners.
Yeah, you got it, right? And so we decided that there needed to be this space where HR professionals can come together and actually have conversations in real time about the issues that they're dealing with, right? And so whether that's, hey, we're thinking about having a holiday party, what were some of the concerns you might have? Or some of the other things that came up, hey, I'm just starting out, I'm new, a supervisor's doing this, how would you deal with that? Right. And so we had some really great conversations the first couple months. So it's the first Friday of every month. And you need to register. You need to go to the team at HR Stories /workshop. You'll see it's called the HR Kitchen Table. Right now, January's on there, but we will get February, March, April. It'll be once a month. You have to register for each month individually, and we're only allowing 10 to 12 people. If we get a big waiting list or we get in a lot of demand, we may open it up and do a second one. So we're just kind of seeing how that goes. But it is a great time just for other HR professionals. Not really. I think Chuck and I are the quietest in the group just because we want everyone else to talk about their experiences and getting things going. So
absolutely.
Yeah, really, I think it's a great opportunity just to have those HR conversations. So it's sort of like the podcast, but with 10 people. That's what it's like. I think that's a good way to describe it. So
that's a great way to describe it. How do you find out about these things, folks? We offer these classes. We offer these opportunities. If they're not free, they are definitely at cost-effective methods. You want to sign up for our newsletter in the show notes below. You can find the link, click sign up for newsletter. You'll get our monthly newsletter and any other announcements with all of the things that we here at the team at HR Stories are doing. So, John, what's happening in the HR world today?
Well, I want to talk about I want to go back on every month, right? The who does it? It's the Economic Council or something sends out. I know I'm not. People are going to be like, "What?" But every month we get the unemployment rate, right? And what is the unemployment rate? What is it, and how are we doing it? And so in October, the number of people getting the number of new jobs being made was lower, right? It was lower than expected. It was a little low. And it moved the unemployment rate up to 3.9% overall, which I think
Mm.
is fascinating. And I know I'm a numbers guy. I like kind of paying attention to see where that is. Historically, if you take out that the pandemic numbers, right, when unemployment shot up, but if you take out, I think it was like 18 months or 16 months, the unemployment rate has been relatively steady under 5% since 2000 and I don't know 12 or something like that. So we can go back and look at that, but it's been really low. But I want you to dive in because sometimes the overall number doesn't tell the story, right? So a couple things. Manufacturing was down 33,000 jobs due to the strikes, right? We had all those big strikes.
Ah, right.
I don't know if you heard this, Chuck. Those strikes are not over. The GM strike is not over with the auto workers. Here in Tennessee and in a couple other plants, they rejected the offer from GM. So we'll see how that goes. So that's down, right? Hospitality and service industry, the unemployment there remains steady. People without, so parents, if you're listening to this, people without a high school education were more likely to be unemployed, right? And so those with a college degree had an unemployment rate of 1.9%. And teenager unemployment improved, right? It improved,
Okay.
but it's still high. It's at 11%. So we're seeing some of that being played out. Black workers at a rate of 5.9% unemployment, where white workers have an unemployment of 3.3. Lots of numbers, right? Lots and lots of numbers, and I can dive into the numbers. And really, the question I think you're thinking, Chuck, so what does this mean to me as the HR director?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Did you see the look on my face?
You're like, John, who cares, right? Who cares? And that, okay, first of all, you have to dig deeper into seeing the numbers, right? You have to dig deeper into seeing the numbers, especially if you have been challenged in finding people, right? It is a tight labor market, but it may just be in your industry. It may not be overall, right? You may hear, oh, blah, 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 the unemployment rate's at higher lumber now. That means there are more people out there, but it may not be in your industry. I know I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but the last time I looked at the professional sector, it was like 2.2%, right? So it was very low. Second, overall, the job market does seem to be becoming a little loosening up a little bit, meaning that it may be easier to find qualified workers. Right? So that is something that we're looking for. We're going to see that. Third, the upward pressure that's been being put on salaries is slowing down. It's not stopping, but it is slowing down. So we may not see these cost of living increases, these other things that are going on continue into 2024. I was reading that it's turning to be more of an employer market than an employee market in 2024. We'll pay attention to that. I still think that pressure is going to be there. So I don't know about that there. And then one of the things is just not about salary for employees, right? And so they are looking for hybrid, remote. At one point, 50% of the workers were in some kind of hybrid agreement. And so I think flexibility in all types of work environment is going to be good. You know, the thing that we were talking about last 2 weeks ago in our podcast about the holistic employment, I think is going to be out there, and that's going to kind of push people forward as well. And so those are the kind of things I'm looking at. I know it's kind of, maybe I'm getting a little too deep into the numbers there, but it's something that you should be paying attention. As HR professionals, you have to understand what's going to be happening in the future, because you got a budget, you got to think about that. And so you can't be just like, oh, well, this is what's happening now. It may not be what's happening in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of that budgeting process is going to be, how are we going to adhere to the new overtime provisions that the Department of Labor is putting out there? You know, when we talk about our labor workforce, our mix of hourly and salaried, exempt, non-exempt, and that sort of thing. How's that all going to be? Because as we know, John, up till November 7th, the Department of Labor was taking comments about increasing the salary threshold from about 35,000 up to about 55,000 a year, which
Yep.
would mean, yeah, to those that have not heard of this yet, that you have to make at least $1,056. This is the proposal in order to be salaried. Doesn't matter what your job duties are, your title, or whatever. You have to, for administrative and professional exemptions, you have to make that level. But here's the interesting thing. I read this statistic. The Department of Labor received more than 26,000 comments on this proposed adjustment. And they're saying this. There's apparently this HR Policy Association. Never heard of them, but they're out there. And they said that they represent 400 corporations, senior HR people, and they felt that the rule is rigid, one size fits all, and it's an untenable framework for overtime. And so it's interesting because what we in HR need to do is we need to still get prepared. And I think, John, the whole idea was they wanted that this could be rolled out 60 days after the end of the comment period. So that puts it November to December, December to January. And a lot of the comments were like, whoa, 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 what? Middle of January? Seriously? Our budgeting, our year has already started. Boom, boom, boom. It should go into effect maybe the first of the year. And so there's a big push by SHRM and a number of companies to maybe take that window and extend it. Maybe it's a 180-day window to get prepared. Maybe it's, hey, let's delay it until 2025. So we have yet to see what the Department of Labor is going to do about that.
Yeah, and so that may have already come out because of our recording of the podcast. But
Right.
it is something that you're going to have to pay attention to. You're going to have to do. 26,000 people, most of them are probably companies and organizations going, oh, we can't do that. I don't think the average employee is reaching out going, yeah, definitely do this. It's going to be good for me. But I do think it's something to be paying attention to. And again, it's a budgeting thing. And so what is the percentage? I would love to know what the percentage of employees that will be impacted by that. My guess is it's probably a lot lower than a lot of people think. I just don't think there's that many employees that are going to be impacted percentage-wise, right? But I mean, again, It could be for some organizations. I'm thinking like convenience stores and that kind of thing. I think it could be a big change, right? So
yeah, there's a lot of that middle manager group that's in that like 45,000. But it's interesting that SHRM specifically said, look, a 60-day compliance window is not enough. We need 180 days. From the day you say this is the rule, it's a 60-day, the clock starts ticking. So folks, no matter what happens, no matter what, you've got to start getting prepared. You need to, make a, graph a list of these employees that are exempt. Are they below the threshold? Are you going to raise them up to, what's the worst case scenario? 55,000. Are you going to not? Are you going to turn them hourly? So many things to prepare, John. But I just want to throw that out for our folks.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a good thought, kind of thinking about that process and what we should be doing. Again, when that comes out, we will definitely have conversations about it on the podcast, and we will definitely make sure that you are set up for success. And so if we have to, I'm throwing this out, Chuck, if we have to redo our checklist and get that, exempt checklist out to people, let's do that. I want to make sure they have the right information. We can adjust that. I think the other thing, and there may be people already doing this, but kind of looking at that salary different and how do you do your budgets and stuff. So reaching out to accountants is going to be a good thing to do in there. Anyway.
Anything else catch your eye this week, John?
Yeah, so this caught my eye, and this is something that Ah, and so I was going through, looking at the newspaper, right, reading the news, and in the U.S. News and Report, right, the magazine newspaper
Yeah.
online, they had an article. Title of the article was "A Guide to Calling in Sick."
Oh, okay.
Right, and so it goes through, right, and my first reaction was, oh, this is going to convince people to call out a sick, but I do think they did a nice job of that tight line between employee focus and company focus, and sort of like they're addressing it to the employees, but they're helping the companies at the same time. So I don't want to go into all the details. If you go to usnews.com, put in "a guide to calling in sick" in the search bar, you will probably find it. But I do want to kind of come through, right? And so the top things they talk about is when to call out sick, right? So when should you
Okay.
call out sick? When shouldn't you sick, right? And so what to say when calling in sick, which I thought was interesting, right? And so, right, and so you don't need to do a whole big dance. And I think we, especially, I think a lot from the manager's point of view, we should not be demanding for them to tell us why they're not coming in sick, right? It really doesn't matter. They're not going to be here. We have sick time policy or a PTO policy, and that should be it, right? And so, kind of get into that. What are good excuses for missing work? I love this. However, calling in for a minor illness such as slight headaches or a runny nose may be not in your best interest. Some managers consider it akin to faking an illness to stay home. Can you call in sick as a remote worker? The answer to that is probably, right? And so again, if you can't do the work, you can't do the work, right?
Sure.
How should you call in sick? Can you text in sick? This is something that I will always say in my workshops, Chuck. When you have a no-show, no-call policy, you better clarify what the no-call means, right? And so is it a text? Is it a communication? Are they calling HR? Are they calling their managers? Who are they calling? Who do they need to do, right? And so kind of getting into all of that. I just thought it was again, tongue in cheek, thought it was good, kind of something to be thinking about in there as well.
Yeah. That's great. And I got to tell you, from a real world example, the texting thing, yeah, when texting first started coming out, people thought, oh, I could use that so I don't have to actually talk to my manager. But we made it very clear. You cannot text that you have to make a phone call, because having that communication sometimes made people double think whether or not they were really going to call in, that they had to. And a lot of times, and we noticed at one place where we had a call-in hotline where employees could call in and just talk to like the call-in hotline person.
Right.
But then when we switched that to say, hold on, let me get your manager on the line, that decreased the actual call-ins.
I would assume now, though, and I don't want to date you any, but now I think texting probably is much more acceptable, right? And so again, you just got to be clear with it, and just got to set it up. So what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? This has got to be clear for your employees, right? So don't get mad at them if you're not clear. So
over Instagram and Snapchat. Yeah, calling off over Instagram and Snapchat. Well, speaking of texting, and John, in our book, The Ultimate Book of HR Checklist, The Ultimate Guide to HR Checklist, we have a whole thing about terminating employees, and sometimes you have to say goodbye. It's tough. Sometimes it's not easy, but it is part of the job. But it's not a good look if you fire an employee over text message. It's just never's good, especially if you do it incorrectly. You let your emotions take the better of you, and you just type it in there. So this was
fired.
Yeah, you're fired. Two employees, they were Black African American employees. They were a married couple, and they were hired to work in Nevada at some repair facility. And they were supervised by white supervisors who were also siblings. So anyways, the story goes that these employees, the two Black employees, were subjected to constant harassment by these other two supervisors who were, I don't know if they were brother and sister or brother and brother. They endured racial taunts, slurs, the N-word. They also said the supervisors regularly denigrated other Black employees. So here's the deal. The two employees decide, hey, I'm going to go and complain, go above their head to senior leaders. But the problems continue. Obviously, the company didn't take steps. So after they complained, one of the two siblings, their supervisors, sent a text message to the person saying, you're fired. You're fired, and they fired them over text message. The EEOC has got involved. They had to do a lawsuit on behalf of the employees for racial harassment, retaliation. It was, Exhibit A, text messages. Exhibit A, text messages. And the EEOC was very specific, and you and I talk, you more than me, because you're a leadership consultant. You're a coach. You coach leaders every day, one-on-one coaching. And I know you've said this before, and this is a quote from the district director of the EEOC from out in California. She says, leaders set company culture by the language and conduct they choose to tolerate, as well as the behavior that they model. Now, there's a quote, the end all quotes, but isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
And the company had to pay $400,000, and then they had a 3-year consent decree, which had yada, 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 all kind of things layered on it.
I will say, though, even if they had fired that person in person, those same ramifications would have come out, right? But taking it to text now gives you a document that can be saved, right, forever, right? And so kind of going back. That's funny, because I think I don't know if I told you this story, but we had an issue with one of our contractors, and in one of my responses to him, I sent him an email and I went through every single one of his tests. When he said, I'll be there the next day, never showed up. I'll be there the next day, never showed up. I had everyone, I put a date in there and I said, here's what you said. So it was pretty straightforward when we went after him.
Yeah, there you go. John, I got something brewing for today's story. I cannot wait to serve it up to you.
Yeah. Wow, interesting.
Yes.
Does it have anything to do with a large white whale?
No, I don't know about a large white whale.
Maybe it does. We'll get back into that, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to stump Chuck here. All right, so it's time for our break. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.
Wonderful. Should we give Samantha some screenshots to do?
You were doing screenshots when I was talking. The one thing that I have noticed is when you don't have your chair, you are much more. You're the dancing bear, Grateful Dead dancing bear.
Yeah, there you go. I love it. I actually love it. I love this. I'm gonna get myself set up. All right, so let's go into the story. Are you ready?
I'm ready. You're going to ask me about how this relates to the big white whale?
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. All right, here we go. Oh. Hey everybody, it's Chuck with the team at HR Stories. The HR Stories podcast provides weekly lessons along with compelling HR news in a storytelling format, but we have found our listeners want more. We know it's easy to be overwhelmed managing the day-to-day responsibilities of HR. We know HR can be isolating, and our listeners want a supportive community to turn to for advice and inspiration. And we've been there. We know what it's like. And that's why John and I at the team at HR Stories have created a membership program that goes beyond the HR Stories podcast. Imagine an education support group for new and experienced HR professionals alike, with twice monthly sessions and an opportunity to collaborate and network with your peers. Whether you are an HR team of one or you have HR as a responsibility, Our membership program is designed to offer benefits that will elevate your knowledge and advance your career. Simply go to team@hrstories.com and click on the membership link in the top menu bar to learn more, or check out the link in the show notes below. All right, welcome back to the HR Stories podcast. I'm your host, Chuck, and with me, as always, is the witty John. John, we're going to have a hot story to serve up right now, but you left me hanging with the whale thing because I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, well, so you have to know your company history. So the book Moby Dick, right? The book Moby Dick, right? The big whale.
Yes.
One of the characters, or this company, was named after one of these characters.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So I thought that character was actually a character from Battlestar Galactica, one of the pilots.
No.
Starbuck.
No.
No.
Not originally.
Okay. Well, there you go, folks.
What's the name of the company?
Well, let's ease into it, John,
Okay.
because here's today, listeners, we're spilling the beans on a coffee giant. See, if I just threw out the name of the company, you'd miss my little we're spilling the beans on the coffee giant. And yes, it is Starbucks. And today's not just your ordinary brew. But it is one filled with labor disputes, corporate challenges, a whole lot of HR lessons. I would say it's brewtastic.
Oh.
Bam.
It's a sad day when he brings out the puns, ladies and gentlemen. It's a sad day. They're beautiful. I can't even do it. You tried,
John. I give you an A for effort. And he was trying to get to the brutiful. So let's get started. It's Philadelphia. You love Philadelphia, don't you?
I think you do. I'm from.
I know.
Fly, Eagles, fly.
There you go. But it's 2019, and we're headed to the Starbucks at Broad and Washington. I'm not familiar with Philly, but maybe you know where that area is. Okay, so there's a little distinct unrest. TJ Bussere and Echo Nowakoska. Well, they're TJ and Echo. Let's just go. They're two baristas, and they end up becoming the voice of some resentment that was starting to simmer. And what was their primary grievance? The primary grievance was the store manager, Aaron Graves. They had a grave problem with Aaron Graves. Potential discrimination, violations of the Philadelphia Fair Workweek Ordinance, and their concerns weren't unique. Echoes of dissatisfaction resonated really amongst several of the employees, painting a troubling picture.
So before we get on with this story, so this is a different story than the Philadelphia Starbucks, where the two Black individuals were told to get out of the store because they were basically Black, right? I mean, so drinking coffee was Black, right? And so they were kicked out because they were Black. And so that became a whole news story on its own, where Starbucks didn't handle it well. I think we talked about it on one of our podcast, where the regional manager didn't handle it well. It was a mess, right? So we're not talking about that. We're talking about another Starbucks issue, and this one's probably a little more union related from what I'm hearing. We'll get into that. And so you mentioned a term in there that I'm not familiar with, and I guess I should be, coming from Philadelphia, called the Philadelphia Fair Workweek Ordinance. Tell me more.
Yeah, this is really fascinating because I know a lot of there are local ordinances, state laws out there that are trying to plug holes in the federal laws, not plug holes, not make holes, but maybe create a better work environment for employees. So this Philadelphia Fair Workweek ordinance provides a few things. Number one, predictable schedules for workers in certain industries, specifically food service and services type of industries. The ordinance was designed with the goal of promoting stability and predictability because we know what it's like, and you and I have both worked those frontline jobs. And there are companies out there that will take advantage of employees in the service industries. So the first thing is predictable pay. This is if the employer had to make changes to a schedule, they have to offer a 10-day notice. They have to give advance notice. If they're going to change the schedule, there has to be some rest between shifts. They have to offer work to existing employees before hiring new employees. You have to say, hey, we need people to work this shift. We need extra help. And you need to offer to your current employees before new employees. And then there's record keeping and protection against retaliation, where employers cannot retaliate against employees for asserting their rights under the ordinance.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, to me, this ordinance is such a great ordinance because we know in the hospitality industry, in this restaurant industry, in the service industry, a lot of times those companies are trying to staff up based on predicted models, and they don't have enough to do that. And so now it's a week away, and they're like, hey, I need you in tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, wait, I have plans, I have things going on, or I don't need you for the next 3 days. And so now you're like, well, wait, I needed that money. And right. And so I do think there's some benefit to the employees on that, and bigger companies and better companies are just, they build it into their business model. And hopefully there's not a last minute thing where they need to do that. Right. So it's kind of really builds that stability and predictability in the workplace, which is fantastic. So Chuck, how did Starbucks supposedly violate this ordinance? Like, I want to hear the real world implications. How did that really happen?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. You know, we know that the employee's main issue here, and this was really with the store manager. They also claimed, though, that Starbucks didn't adhere to provide predictable schedules, advance notices, and predictable pay. And it created an environment of uncertainty for many employees, directly impacting their work-life balance. So while the main issue was really the store manager, Aaron, multiple employees were voicing their concerns about their work conditions too.
Yeah, and it sounds like there was more steam than just the espresso machines.
Oh, well said. Oh, well played, young man. Yes, indeed, indeed. So, John, have you heard about something called, it's from Starbucks, it's one of their policies. It's called the How We Communicate rule.
I'm vaguely familiar. I think you've mentioned it to me. Something about employees needing to communicate respectfully in the workplace, and what does that look like? All that kind of stuff.
Exactly. So, in addition to everything we talked about going on at the store, Starbucks has a policy, and it's important we go over this because it plays a big part in our story today. Starbucks handbook mandates that partners, that's what they call their employees. They're called partners. Partners are expected to communicate with other partners and customers in a professional and respectful manner at all times. The use of vulgar or profane language is not acceptable.
Is that the whole policy, Chuck? Or did you take
That
the
actually, no, there was no dots or anything like that. That is the actual phrase in the handbook.
Interesting. I'm going to read it again just so everyone, the listeners, can kind of hear it. Because so here's what it says, people. It says partners are expected to communicate with other partners, their coworkers, and customers in a professional, respectful manner at all times. The use of vulgar or profane language is not acceptable. So that doesn't sound like an extreme policy. It sounds like I want people to be civil in my workplace. What's the problem, Chuck?
Yeah, well, let me tell you more of the story. But I wanted you to keep that policy in mind, and thank you for repeating it again. So TJ, the barista, felt the weight of his concerns, and he sought the guidance from something called 1PA. Pennsylvania initials are PA, right? So 1PA,
Yeah.
which is an advocacy group in Philadelphia.
That's bold moving, going external. I know bold move, but they're going external, right? And so that means this person was so disgruntled that they had to step outside to find help.
Yes. So, and it wasn't without consequence. So on July 15th, TJ lodges a formal complaint against the manager, Aaron Graves, but an internal complaint. But Starbucks' internal processes, yeah, they kind of overlooked it, it seems. Starbucks conducted an internal review of the formal complaint and it saw, well, no further investigation is necessary, lack of sufficient evidence about problems. You know, when you have a policy like this, John, and I'm probably getting a little ahead of myself, but when you say you're expected to communicate with other partners and customers in professional, respectful manner, that could be fine. But if it's used to squelch what they call chill an employee's rights to talk about their work environment, to complain about their manager, that's where problems happen. And on July 22nd, 7 days later, things heat up. TJ Echo and a band of supporters from outside, both from inside and outside the store, you know, whether they work there or not, they held a big demonstration.
Oh, wow. Right. And so that's causing all this mess in front of the store, lots of things going on. People are upset. And so, what exactly were they demanding?
They said, address ongoing discrimination, follow the Philadelphia Work Week ordinance, and remove Aaron Graves, the manager.
All right. So, they were asking for the removal of the manager. They were asking for the company to follow the Fair Work Week ordinance. And then obviously there's some kind of underlying discrimination that was going on as well. You haven't really got to that in the story, but there was some of that going on as well. That's pretty big list.
Yeah, they were not happy. And then they start taking to platforms like Instagram, which was amplifying their cause. But Starbucks wasn't just watching this happen.
Well, what do you mean they weren't just watching? I think you're trying to get at something, and I'm not. Maybe it's the afternoon lulls. I don't know. I'm not getting it. Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, when you're watching and kind of keeping tabs on something, but when you're monitoring and yeah, they were actively monitoring. Specifically, the company was found to be monitoring Instagram accounts like Philly. It's called Philly Barista Justice. That was the Instagram account that the Starbucks employees created.
Okay, so this wasn't just a random person on the street that had created this. It was the employees themselves had created this Instagram account called Philly Barista Justice. And so Starbucks found this out, right? A little sleuthing on their things, and they started watching this, right? And so they started monitoring what the employees were saying, their activities on that Instagram, especially, right? And so you haven't said this, but it sounds like they took these grievances to the level of, hey, maybe we should start thinking about unionizing. All right. And so this is a controversial practice under the U.S. federal law, particularly the National Labor Relations Act. Workers have the right to engage in what we call concerted activities for their mutual aid of protection, meaning they have a right to talk to each other about their working conditions, about their manager, Aaron Graves, about company policy not following the Philadelphia Work Week thing, right? All that in there. And so they have a right to do that in there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really the lines that were starting to get crossed here. Was the monitoring led to them taking action against these employees. And in the context of the Starbucks story, where employees were discussing on Instagram their grievances and organizing activities, it could be interpreted as an attempt to intimidate or suppress the activities. Corporate surveillance could be perceived as infringing on the rights that you just mentioned from the National Labor Relations Act.
So I'm going to go a little bit different here, but so do the employees need to know whether that surveillance was going on or not? Because how can that stop? If I don't know they're doing it, that's not going to stop me from doing what I'm doing. Now, if I know they're doing it, it may push me there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's good. So you're right. It's if they are doing it and they're not taking any action on it that would chill the employees' rights. Let's say they're monitoring it and they're like, oh my gosh, we didn't realize that was going on. We need to, put in a better management. We need to, talk to the employees, open up some dialogue, not chill their rights, but say we understand or we have heard or through because it's out there, it's public. Now I will tell you, if it was a private group, John, and they were pretending to be someone that they were not so they could get access to the group, that's wrong. But if it's a public group and they hear these issues, just like any company hears issues about customers that are not happy, we're going to make changes to our policies to make them better for you. And if that happened and had happened, I don't think we'd be at odds here right now. We probably would not have much of a story to tell.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the other thing is because on Instagram, you can figure out who's following you. And if there was a corporate Starbucks account suddenly following Philadelphia Baristas Justice, that could have I could see a very chilling effect, like, okay, we can't do these conversations anymore because the big brother is listening to us. All right. So before we dive deeper into this, can you give me a recap, get our listeners and me back on the same page so we know where we're going?
Sure, absolutely. So we started with unrest at Starbucks at the Broad and Washington location of Philadelphia. Primarily, it's centered around their store manager, but the main issues were potential discrimination, violations of the Fair Work Week ordinance from Philadelphia, and the Starbucks How We Communicate rule. The tensions escalated with protests, social media advocacy, and alleged corporate surveillance culminating in a legal showdown. This did end up going to court.
All right, so what happens next? Tell me what happens next. Where do we go from here?
Sure. So I want to go back to the policy just so we can propel from there. I would tell you there's a lot of back and forth through the years. There really was. I went through the court documents. There's so much motion this, motion that, whatever, anti-motion. But in the end, it all came down to the Starbucks How We Communicate handbook policy, which mandated professionalism, respectful communication without any vulgar or profane language.
All right, so let me guess. The workers interpret this rule as a means to stifle union activities, and it felt infringed upon their rights.
Yes. So the employees did believe that. They were like, hey, this rule is being weaponized against us. For example, managers use the rule to discipline employees for what they discussed in private conversations or private social media groups. So there we go. Now it ties it all together.
Now I get, because I didn't understand it, right? Because you didn't bring those two connections. I was like, that's weird. Okay, I don't understand that language. But if the managers were using that language to chill their concerted activities, right? And so again, if I'm interpreting as a manager, well, you can't be doing that because that's against our policy. All right, now I'm seeing it. All right, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, so it was a strict interpretation, application of the rule made the employees feel unfairly monitored because they're like, oh my gosh, I'm getting written up for what I said over here. And the so there was that push for unionization, and they felt the company was actively trying to suppress the movement.
So how did this all kind of play out,
Yeah.
right? And so there's against the union and that kind of stuff. And so what happened? Tell me what happened. What went on?
Yeah, so here's the deal, John. It did go to court, as you suspect, and it wasn't just the employees and the union people or this that felt this way. The judge, the administrative law judge, said this is a significant issue, and the judge, his name was Michael Rosas, and he says, I am ruling this policy and the way it was applied to be a violation of federal labor law. The judge said this rule can be interpreted or was interpreted by the workers as an attempt by Starbucks to stifle and discourage union activity, and it specifically came under Judge Rosas' scrutiny as he analyzed how they applied the rule and its implications. And he said, you know what? This rule has been used by the store managers to discipline the employees, even leading to an employee termination based on the content of a private conversation within that private media group. So while the dissatisfaction for the Broad and Washington Starbucks in Philadelphia had its roots with the manager, it just escalated from there. And the how we communicate policy actually was the story, was the court case. It became the pivotal point in the larger context as the employees felt their rights were infringed upon, and eventually there was that push towards unionization.
Yeah, and I get that. I mean, it seems to me that the managers overinterpreted that policy and took it where they were infringing on the employees' rights. And basically, what it says to me is that the managers were not properly trained on what they can and cannot do under the National Labor Relations Board. So let me just clarify for our listeners what that means, right? So the National Labor Relations Act, Section 7 and 8, are at issue here, right? This is where we're looking at when we're talking about this. This is where the judge came in. Section 7 protects rights to organize, form labor unions, and partake in collective bargaining. In contrast, Section 8 prohibits employers from interfering or coercing or restraining these rights, right? And so they really work hand in hand. One of them says, hey, employees, you have these rights. Employers, these employees have this right. You can't do anything about it. That's there, right? And so on the unfolding events at Starbucks, especially those documented on social media platforms like Instagram, suggest a possible infringement on Section 7. That's why Judge Rosa was like, whoa, this seems like you're interfering with these clear laws.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, and so specifically, there were 4 things that Starbucks did wrong. Number one, they suppressing what they call a collective action. Company allegedly told employees, well, I shouldn't say allegedly as much because it was in the court documents, but they said, hey, you cannot make demands or complaints to management, and that hindered their rights, protected rights under Section 7. They had retaliation. The company retaliated for union activities. Starbucks was found to have issued warnings, reduced work hours, even discharged employees for their active union involvement. Number 3, inconsistent communication policies. Starbucks had this stance where they prohibited discussions about work decisions during work hours, but allowed other topics. And they said, you know what? The National Labor Relations Act allows you to talk about all these things, but you just pick and chose what people could talk about at work. And number 4 was surveillance and interrogation, and that's the monitoring. John, I got to tell you, in the end, and there's a long list of things Starbucks had to do, but they literally had to send a letter and post something saying this policy was wrong. We enforced it incorrectly. We are removing it. It was ruled illegal. Like, you look at the court documents, there's just too much to go through here. But it was a list of about 15 things Starbucks had to do, had to apologize specifically to these employees, had to give them their job back, had to give them back pay, had to give them job search pay, it was unbelievable. And all they had to do was listen to their employees at the very beginning.
Yeah. And I mean, to me, again, I think to me, when I see this, I think, right. So when you hear this, right, we hear Starbucks did this thing wrong. I'm going to dive in here a little bit based on what you've been saying. It was not Starbucks, the corporation, that did something wrong. It was the managers at the store and probably the regional manager at the store that did something wrong because they enforced the policy incorrectly, and that got the company in trouble. And so, yes, and the company, of course, right, they want to get this gone with, so they're like, okay, we're going to pull that policy out and we're going to apologize to these individuals because my question is, and I know it's not in the case study, I know you don't know, but what happened to the manager? Because that manager should have been fired. Right? Should have been fired.
You know what? I think that's actually in the court documents. But I don't know specifically. I believe they did remove that manager, Aaron Graves, and they brought someone else in. But all the other things it was just too much. I mean, beyond those specifics of the case, the broader lesson here, as you said, companies need to remember that while maintaining brand image and ensuring decorum is essential, it should never, and it cannot. It's not our opinion, John. It doesn't matter what we think. It's the law. And if you suppress genuine employee concerns or infringe on their rights, you're on the hook.
Yeah, your company's on the hook, managers.
Yes.
Right. And so, managers, if you don't know, you got to go to training. You got to ask for it and go, hey, I don't understand this NRA 7. Tell me more. I want to know what I can and cannot do in these situations. Definitely go in there. Right. And so what do you think this means for companies and HR departments going forward?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance between one that requires constant vigilance to know and maintain the pulse of what's happening with your employees. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want happy employees, good morale, productive workplace, so we as the company can make money and we can all move forward, right? But that genuine care for and well-being for your employees, not a but I mean, we all want that. But you have to watch and it sounded like this was becoming, what's that phrase, John, when it's kind of like, oh, you pushed me, so I'm going to push you, and next thing you know, we're all pushing each other and we're fighting, escalating, and no one knows what we're actually fighting about. When if we just sat back and we see a simple dispute can lead to a large fallout if it's not handled properly.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's a really good lesson here. And I think, again, right, employee communication is key, critical, right? We need to have that employee communication. We need supervisors and managers to be trained. And corporately, we need to be setting both our managers and our employees up for success. So we're not running into this situation where our employees are disgruntled and annoyed and they're going to our managers. The managers are not set up successfully to handle this. And then it gets brought up. And by that time, it's probably too late corporately. You're just going to have to deal with the outfall and hope it doesn't get as big as this did, right? And so kind of doing that in there as well. So how do you wrap it up, Chuck? How do you wrap this up?
I would say, remember, protections offered by institutions like the NLRA, and the onus on corporations to uphold these are paramount.
Yeah, and the one thing I said, and you've mentioned it numerous times, not today, but in one other of our podcasts, is that the National Labor Relations Board is really probably benefiting unions more and really looking at what we can and cannot do from a union perspective in the workplace. And so paying attention to all of that, I think, would be a good lesson for our listeners to do it. I think we talked about that 2 podcasts, maybe 3 podcasts ago. So you may want to go check that out.
Mm-hmm. Cheers to that, John. Cheers to that.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is always a lesson in every story. If you haven't checked us out, please check us out at the team at hrstories.com. We have workshops, we have podcasts, we have resources, we have everything you need to get HR right. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast. The material presented in this podcast is for informational purposes only. Chuck and John always recommend using an employment lawyer or HR consultant to handle any legal concerns or HR issues. We do our best to double check sources and make sure the information we are providing is accurate. We may eliminate or embellish without changing the basic narrative to make the story easier to understand. In certain circumstances, we may change identifying information to protect the innocent. The HR Stories broadcast is brought to you by the team at HR Stories. The team at HR Stories is designed to help anyone with HR responsibilities be better at managing the employee experience. To engage with us, go to the hrstoriesteam.com and learn more about how the team at HR Stories can support your business or nonprofit. Thank you for listening to the HR Stories podcast, where there is a lesson in every story.